hit the wrong button.
Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for coming.
You guys here? You need this?
Here we go. Yeah, again, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming. We certainly didn't think we'd have this many people here. It's great, and we thank you very much for coming up. I'll just get started a little bit on the history of the fire department. As you well know, Butte's been around for quite a while. In the 1870s, they pretty much fought the fires with the bucket brigade. Just to give you a little history on the bucket brigade, and I'm not too sure if it was actually the case here in Butte, but in most cities, every resident and owner of a home or a building had to have buckets that they would use to extinguish fires. Well, to start out with, Butte had quite the water system back then in those days, and the water lines were made out of wood, and then at certain locations, like say for instance ports in Maine, they would have what they called a plug. And what the plug was, it was actually a hole that was drilled in the wooden water line, and then they inserted a wooden plug. So that when they needed to get water to fight a fire, say right across the street, the fire department come out and they'd say, grab a plug, make a plug. Well, all they did was actually just pull the wooden plug out of the wooden water line. And then the water would come squirting out. That's how they filled up their water buckets to extinguish the fires. Later, in Chicago was the one that actually, in the 1870s, they figured out, well, let's stick a hose in that hole in the water line. They stuck a hose in there. They ran it through a two-man piston pump. You'd have one firefighter on one side of it, one firefighter on the other side, and they'd be pumping it like this, and that's how they were able to get the water to the fires. But still to this day, the fire departments say, make a plug, grab a plug. That's how it all started. And then shortly after that, a guy by the name of Mueller invented the fire hydrant. But just a little history on how things happened back then. Well, anyway, in the early 1880s here in Butte, they decided they better organize a fire department. So on April 15, 1883, the city hired J.H. McCarthy to be the first fire chief here in Butte. And the way things progressed in the 1880s, Butte kept getting, bigger and bigger. So they said, we have to organize a paid fire department. So on August 30th, 1889, I think it was ordinance number 143, which passed unanimously by the city council. They established the paid fire department. And the chief at that time was M.J. O'Brien, and he was pretty much did all the work to organize the paid fire department. And 4 days later, after that ordinance passed, they hired 6 firefighters, and then the following year they hired 9 more.
Wow.
And this was the Central Fire Station, which was the former City Hall. The fire department was on the first floor. As you can probably see, those big doors right there, that's where the hose wagons, the hook and ladder truck, and the chief's wagon came out of those doors. And at that time, kind of an interesting point here, who was the mayor at the time was W.R. Kenyon. We'll kind of explain him a little bit later. And then in 1900, they built a fire station right here. Well, actually, it's right next door here. And it was, station number 1. Later it become, of course, the Butte Civil War Archives. At this station, they had the fire chief, 15 men, and an electrician who worked on the fire alarm system. At this station, they had you know, hook and ladder truck, a big chemical engine, a hose cart, and a reserve hose cart. The office of the fire chief was on the first floor, and they had a very extensive fire library here, plus a gymnasium. And what really there isn't too much history about the horses that they had at the fire department. Here's a couple of their names: Jim and Dandy, Prince and Nig, and Tom and Jerry. That's about all we could find on the names of those horses. But they, of course, they were the ones that did all the work and got the hose wagon and the hook and ladder apparatus to the fires. If you're looking on the internet, just Google harnessing fire horses. It's a very interesting video. It's only a few, maybe 30 seconds long, but it shows how fast they could harness those horses and get them out the door. And it's really interesting. I wish I would have been able to put it on here, but I'm not that technical to do that. But
We didn't have enough time.
well, then, this is the Arizona Street Station. People might remember it as, now it's Bob and Bruce, or Bruce and Bob's Good Guy Pond. And this was the headquarters for the assistant chief plus 9 firefighters. They had they also had a hook and ladder there, plus a chemical apparatus. And this station serviced the railroad depot area and the warehouse district, which was growing and growing rapidly. They actually called it the South End of Butte, believe it or not. And then, of course, the west side, up there on Caledonia and Excel, that area was really, really growing at the time. And the people up there thought, you know, they didn't have adequate fire protection. So they petitioned the city council to build a station up there. And at this station, they had 4 firefighters, a hose wagon, and a chemical apparatus. Unfortunately for the residents up there, this station closed in 1915 because of financial constraints. And all this information that, you know, putting forth to you guys has come out of different books. One written by Peter Sanger, who was a fire chief. One written about the Great Explosion, which was the Canyon Connell explosion. And then another book, The Dynamite Explosion, which is written by John Davies. And you know what? Maybe this would be the perfect time to... You can take a look at these and pass them around. This is the scenes of the explosion, which, of course, everybody knows it happened in 1895. This here is a souvenir program that the fire department put out, actually 1 month before the Canyon Connell explosion. This book here is just written by John Davies about the fire department, the city of Butte, and the Great Explosion. This here is the little program we put together for the 1989 convention. After a little bit, I'll send around a couple more things you can look at. This here was the fire station they called South Butte. It was built in 1901, and all they had out there at the time was a reserve hose wagon. The station was not manned until 1912. But if there was a fire in that south side area, the residents could run over there, grab the hose wagon, and take it to the fire.
It's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
In 1975, they remodeled, actually they started to build the 2 far bays at the south side station, and then after they got that done, they tore down the original fire station and added on the 3rd bay plus the living quarters for the fire station. And you know, currently, the Butte Fire Department has 34 members, 4 8-member shifts, A, B, C, and D shift. And then we have the fire chief, the assistant chief / fire marshal, and the lady that does all the work at the fire station, the office coordinator, Shelley Jones.
Keeps all those boys
It's actually,
alive.
Shelley came on after I left, but from what I hear, everybody loves her and enjoys having her around. I'll just go back to the south side just real quick. They have 3 firefighters there on duty now. They have a 1,500 gallon per minute pumper. They have a rescue unit and then a reserve pumper. At the Uptown Fire Station, of course, it's the headquarters for the chief, the assistant chief, and Shelley. And on shift is usually 5 firefighters. They have 2 first-aid engines, a ladder truck, a rescue unit, and a reserve engine. A couple of people wanted me to talk about how the fire department responds to a call, and hopefully I get this right because I haven't been there for a couple of years. But they will respond with, now for a fire, there's at least 3 engines coming plus a ladder truck. And that's pretty much the way it is on all the calls. So there's no sense having that ladder truck sitting in the station when it can be put to use. This is kind of an interesting slide here. This is a water gong. And then we have the other one here that Jim's pointing out is in the exhibit out here in the hallway. Anyway, just to give you a little idea on the sprinkler systems, I got to get the right date here. In 1812, a guy by the name of William Congreve in London, England, he invented the sprinkler system. It's pretty much like it is today, only in that case it was a manual sprinkler system. So if a fire started, you had to run outside, open up a valve to let the water come in. And then shortly thereafter, in 1881, Frederick Grinnell, who you can see his name on the water gong out here in the exhibit, and he improved it and patented the automatic fire sprinkler system. And it's pretty much similar to how they use it today. Just to give you up here on the ceiling, maybe I'll do it in the front here. This here is a sprinkler head. And once the fusible link in that sprinkler head breaks because of the heat of the fire, it will automatically start flowing water. And the minute that happens, then it sets off the fire check valve, which then sends the alarm to the water gong, and/or nowadays they have, it's tied right into a fire alarm system, be it private or municipal. And that's back in the day before they had, the automatic alarms that were tied into, private or municipal systems. That water gong would ring. And anybody out in the neighborhood, when they heard that, they knew there was a fire. And these sprinkler heads up here, these are probably the most popular, the ones that they use the most. They're rated anywhere from 135 degrees up to 175 degrees. And you can tell that by, can you see the red liquid inside those heads? And there's several heads in this room. But red would give, it's either red or orange. It tells you which temperature of that head. And boy, when they go off, there is a ton of water. This is the fire alarm box system. they put these in, the first one was a gainer system, they put it in 1889. 2 years later, for some odd reason, maybe it was the fact that they didn't like gainer, they put in the Gamewell. And Gamewell is the one that we had up until 1986. And as you can tell on this box here, I think it's 116. 116, that fire alarm box was located on the corner of Arizona and Aluminum, which was Newbro Drug. Well, anyway, when you would open that box, pull down this little white lever, then that would send an alarm to the main fire station. And in the early years, it came across on the fire alarm telegraph wire. And when it came into the station, it would come into a receiver, which is what's being pointed out right now, and box 116. When it would come in, it would start to, the machine itself would start to turn, and there was a 1-inch ticker tape there, and so it would punch a hole in the tape, punch 1, there'd be a space, 1, a space, and then 6 holes. So it would automatically go to the board, and you would see, okay, 116, Arizona Aluminum. And every time that punched the ticker tape, would also ring the bell. So for instance, that would, there you go, that's the bell. That's the original bell. That's probably 124 years old. And now it sits down at the Mercury, Montana fire station. But anyway, when that alarm would come in, it would ring that bell 32 times. And some of the old alarms, or I guess it's actually the newer alarms, out in the south side area, those numbers were huge. That bell would be ringing forever. And you had to make sure that the ticker tape and the bell was wound tight. That was one thing you had to do every shift. Oh, and then the ladder. Can you see the ladder there? That was here at the old fire station. They used to have to climb up that ladder and wind up the bell.
Oh, man.
I think my good buddy Tim might have to talk about this slide. If you don't recognize him, that's Timmy McCarthy. And I can't remember how many poles do they have here?
There's two in the dorm room. When I was here, before that, they had 2 in the dorm room, one in the chief's office and one in the living quarters for the chief. But when they got the new pumpers, they had to change the doors. They had to take down the other 2 out. So they only have 2 in the dorm room.
I don't know if you noticed when you walked in this room that the fire pole is right outside this door. And during our little exhibit, we put a dummy up there on the pole. You know, radio communications were very, very important back then. This here is John Connors, and he was working in the boardroom at the time. They, let's see, going back to the radios and the trucks, when I first started, we only had 3 radios. You know, one in each engine, and one for the engine out in the flat. Now, everybody has their own radio, plus, I believe, 2 backup batteries for those radios. But back in the day, when you were on the board, you could not, if you had to leave the boardroom, you had to make sure someone else came in and took over your spot. And then you can see him, he has his hand on a switch there. When they would take off out of here, you know, head down Main Street, they would ask for a light. They would say, give us Granite and Main. And what he would do, he would turn a switch on here, and that would turn all the lights on Granite, the traffic lights on Granite and Main all red. And the second truck going behind him would say, "We cleared Granite and Main, give us park in Main." So they did that all the way down Main Street, just to make sure that they could get through. There'd be no cars coming through the intersections. Nowadays they have the octagon system that works pretty much the same way, only if you're heading south on Main, it turns that light green, the other three lights red. So you can get through, and then the traffic coming from the other directions will all stop. At least they're supposed to. A lot of times they don't. This picture was taken in 1975. It shows the Uptown Station. It's the one on the left is 75 Mac. The one on the right is the 66 Mac. And at the same time, down at the Southside Fire Station, the first one there on the left is a 54 American LaFrance, and then the other one is a 48 Mac. And actually that 48 Mac is the same Mac that's out in front here, which was refurbished 2 years ago? 2 years ago with a project that they ran through the Montana State Prison. And I'll tell you what, that truck is beautiful.
It is.
This topic is actually pretty interesting, talking about all the different chiefs that we've had. Like I mentioned earlier, the first chief was J.H. McCarthy, and he was actually a chief from 1883 to 1889. And from there, it would seem like our chiefs were 2 years, they might have been at the most in the chief's office for 2 years. And what happened then, and it was the same thing for the firefighters, every year when there was a city election, all the city elections at that time were held in April or May. And if a new mayor was elected, he came in and cleaned house, got rid of everybody. Well, it wasn't until 1899 when the Montana State Legislature passed the civil service rule stating that you couldn't do that anymore. Because if you look out on the wall of honor, the guys, every 2 years it seemed like there was a massive layoff. But that's, was really a good thing, because after that fact, in 1899, all the firefighter applicants had to go on, a strict examination as to their physical qualifications, good behavior, attendance to duty, and ability to perform were the three requirements of being a firefighter at that time. It's kind of interesting, we had 9 fire chiefs in the first 16 years, and we've only had 7 since. The shortest serving chief was George Lapp, and he took over after the Kenyon Connell explosion, and he was in office for 4 months. Morgan Griffiths, he took over right after Peter Sanger died, and he was only in there for 7 months, from March of 15 to October of 15. The longest serving fire chief was Fred Martin. His uniform and badges are in the exhibit out here. He was actually the fire chief for 30 years. Actually, just 1 month short of 30 years. The second longest serving fire chief was John McCarthy, and he was chief from November 3rd, 1954 to September 1st of 81. And just a couple of interesting facts about some of the chiefs. William F. Jordan, who was the fire chief from May 14th to 1890, or excuse me, May 14th, 1890 to March 4th, 1891. And then of course he got laid off at that time. And he went to work for the police department. And then shortly thereafter, on June 24th, 1892, he was murdered down on Idaho Street while on duty as as a police officer. Peter Sanger, who we mentioned many a time, he was fire chief promoted in 1899, It just so happens that he was promoted by the first fire chief, J.H. McCarthy, who at that time was the mayor of Butte. And Peter Sanger was very, very instrumental in getting the first firefighter retirement bill passed on March 30th, 1899, which was House Bill 17. And everybody, and I'm sure most of the firefighters know this, that the reason that bill was passed was because of what happened 4 years earlier when 13 firemen were killed in the Kenyon Connell explosion. And of course, here's the last three chiefs, and this is a great picture because it was taken at the opening night of the exhibit. Jim Larry, he was the fire chief from 81 to 85, and then Bob Armstrong from 85 until, I think he left in October of 2003. And then Jeff Miller came on January 5th, 2004. Jim Larry had 37 years of service, as did Bob Armstrong on the fire department. Here's some of the fires. This is probably a lot more interesting than listening to me talk. The Bose Block fire was the a huge fire. It says Granite in Utah. Does anybody know where Utah Street was in 1889? It's currently the Hamilton Street. And it was quite the fire back then. And then one of the buildings that burned back then was a building owned by M.J. Connell, who just so happened to be the same guy from Kenyon Connell. Most people in Butte, at least I think most people in Butte, have heard about the Kenyon Connell explosion. For years and years, nobody really ever knew anything about it. And then it was, they had the PBS special, which I'm sure a lot of people have seen. And a lot of your kids and grandkids have probably, heard about the Kenyon Connell explosion because of Chris Fisk at Butte High. I mean, honest to God, they know more about the Kenyon Connell fire than anybody that ever worked at the fire department. But getting back to the PBS special, we have a special guest here today who was very instrumental in getting Gus Chambers from, PBS to do the story about the Kenyon Connell explosion. And back here on the left-hand side of the audience here is Ed Brunsball. He's a retired battalion chief for the Missoula City Fire Department. He was the one, after hearing the story, got a hold of Gus Chambers, and it's all history from there. Because Ed, stand up and... And I don't know if a lot of you know about this, but the Gus Chambers, he won an Emmy for that PBS special. And mainly a lot of it was because of the graphics when he blew up the model of the and he used a sparkler bomb, by the way. This is the Simons store, and Simons was people remember Burrs? Well, a lot of you probably remember Simons too. Burrs, I remember as a kid, Burrs was probably the only place in Montana at that time that had an escalator in their building. I remember going down there with my mom and grandmother, just going up and down the escalator while they shopped. It was right there on the corner of Park and Dakota. But what was very interesting about this fire was that Dakota Street did not go through. It ended right there at Park. And then after,
It's Academy Street.
oh, it's called Academy Street. But then they, after the fire, you know, they tore down Simon's, and then they built the new Simon's, which would have been in the Phoenix building, and then they put Dakota Street through down to Galena. And this is the Galena Street side of the Simon's store. This is the Thomas block. It was on the first block of West Park Street, right where a lot of you probably remember the P.O. newsstand. That's where that fire was.
It burned in 1912 and it was rebuilt in 1914. And in the same spot, so that building is just kind of like the Phoenix. It rose from the ashes and it's back in place again. It's named the same as it was before. It's still the Thomas block, and it's still there. Then McKinley School burned in 1919. They took off the top floors of the building. The fire started in the top floor. It was the workshop for the school district there. And they had a class on the top floor for woodworking, etc. The fire started up there, burnt the upper floors. They tore the top floors off the building and left the base, and then rebuilt the school. I think it opened back up in 1921. There have been a lot of fires in Butte, but some of the major ones, especially the ones that we had pictures of, were pretty dramatic. We kind of listed as such. This was the Empress Theater. It followed from the Grand Theater. It burned a couple times through the years, but this fire was in April 15th, 1931. And where that sits right now is where Mike Thatcher has the garage for the CCS garage. It used to be the former bus depot lot. And this building next to it was where the Butte Miner was, and that was burned and remodeled, and it was torn down right after this was, or I guess it was torn down in the 60s to make an expansion for the bus depot. This corner here was part of the library, and this is a pretty neat picture. This is a really nice picture on a glossy. It's got really good reflections. It shows a lot of the fire equipment, hoses, and streams of water, and the light. It's an impressive picture. There were two Moxon cafes. The first Moxon was on the north side of Broadway Street, just off of Hamilton, and the second one was across the street, and they both succumbed to fires, one in 1940 and one in 1970. Butte High School, the original Butte High School was built on the corner of the southwest corner of Idaho and Park Street. It fell into disrepair, and a new high school was built and opened in 1938 down at its present location. And this building was taken and used during the 1930s by the WPA and some other administrative duties for the federal government in the 30s. Then it was vacant for a while, and it burned in 1946. And it was torn down and became Girls Central, now Butte Central. The American Theater is where Skaggs used to be on Park Street, and it burned in 1950. It was really cold. They had like 2 feet of ice in the front of the building on Park Street. Butte Hotel fire was on Park Street where the parking shop is. This is the Herbert Tower, and this is Purdy's building. So everything in between there burned down, was torn down in 1954. They made way for a building called the parking shop. This is another picture of the Butte Hotel fire. A fellow named Clinton Peck worked for the Anaconda Company. He took a lot of pictures during that era, and this was taken from the Hennessy building. It's a pretty neat picture of the Butte Hotel fire. This fire was where Walker's Bar was, Walker's Tower, right next to the metal bank. The significance for this was in 1962. You can see the old equipment that they used at the time then. But this is pretty old equipment. That's a 38 Hertz ladder truck. I don't know what year that truck is, but it's pretty old. 38 in there. So they must have another fire or something going on at the same time, because that's what they had to respond for that fire. Kind of different. This fire was on the corner of Hamilton and Park, right next to the Moxon. At the time, this was Ashton Printing. This burned, and this is a parking lot now as well. And Ashton Printing moved up here to the corner into the professional building, the Louis Vuitton building. And that burned later as well. This McKee Printing was on Granite Street across from the Silver Bow Block, the Silver Bow Center. It was burned in 1965. This was the Beaver Block on the northeast corner of Granite and Main Street where that Wells Fargo drive-in bank is now. This was slated for demolition, and they built this little woodwork walkway around the outside of it. And strangely enough, it happened to catch on fire. And burned down pretty good. So it made it easier to tear down. Where are we talking about this one?
Gonna have to hurry up here too. You know, the fire equipment, you know how it started out with the horses, Pompeii ladders. Anybody know what those are? They used to, in the old days, they would take it, throw the Pompeii part of the ladder through the window, climb up, get out on the windowsill, throw it through the window on the next level. That's how they got up to the top of the buildings. You know, of course, our hydrants now are much better than what they are. The pressure is actually probably about the same as it was back in the early years in the 1880s. We went from chemical wagons to extinguishers to foam. You know, we use a lot of foam now for petroleum-based product fires. The nozzles are better. The hoses are a lot better and a lot lighter. Ladder trucks now, of course, are a lot bigger and they reach a lot higher. The pumper trucks, of course, can pump a lot more water than they did back in the day, and they're better equipped. As far as the personal protective equipment, you know, we have rubber boots and leather boots. The coats and bunkers are now made out of Nomex or Aramid, which they're designed to withstand high temperatures. The helmets nowadays are plastic composite. They actually had some helmets years ago that were made out of metal. I couldn't imagine that. Nomex hoods. The hoods are what you use to cover your face, your neck, and your ears, and they go around your the face piece on your self-contained breathing apparatus. Which the self-contained breathing apparatus, a lot of people think it's all oxygen. It's not oxygen. It's compressed air. Pretty much similar to the exact air we're breathing right now. You know, roughly 20% oxygen, the rest nitrogen, a little bit of argon. And of course, there's the newer pumpers. The Flying Squadron was, you know, the first motorized fire truck they had. And of course, the latest, the 2007 Pierce. The resuscitator or air wagon is what they responded years ago when it went on a medical call. And it really didn't have a whole lot of equipment other than a resuscitator and oxygen bottle. Nowadays, you know, the rescues are equipped with all kinds of EMS equipment. They have Jaws of Life, you know, the extrication equipment that we use to get people out of cars that have been damaged. You know how the people can't get out of them. That's how we use those cutters and spreaders and rams to open up the car to get the people out. And this is just the 38 Peter Persh. When they bought that Peter Persh, it was $14,000 in 1938. The ladder truck that they bought in '66 was $68,000, and then the ladder truck that we have now is over $1 million. And of course, Mach 3, which is out in front in the same spot that it was back when we opened up the exhibit. Oh, I just mentioned about the price of the ladders, how much they were. The one picture there with the Peter Persh is when they got that. We were unable to tell who all those people were. We think it was probably the mayor and maybe the city council members. Oh, and the hydrants. As you can tell, the hydrant that we have on exhibit here is the one right there. It has two, oh, and it was made in 1888. It has two 2.5 inch ports. Some of the older ones actually had three 2.5 inch ports. And then you get down to the newer ones, which I believe are all Mueller hydrants. And on the hydrant in the middle, that's a Stortz adapter. You can take the cap off, which is a quarter turn, and you hook up the 5-inch hose the same way with just a quarter turn. It's a whole heck of a lot faster than putting an adapter on and then putting the 5-inch hose on. And just to give you an idea, the hydrants, you know, were for ISO. I don't know if anybody knows what ISO is. It's the Insurance Service Organization. They're the ones that determine your fire insurance rating along with your premiums that you pay on your house. Anyway, they want all these hydrants to be tested with you know, your gallons per minute. In Butte, they did it by excuse me, by pressure. So if you see on this this hydrant here, the one in the middle, it has an orange cap, which means excuse me, the pressure is anywhere from 50 to 120 pounds per square inch. The one on the right is a red cap, which is anywhere from, you know, around 50 pounds PSI. If you have a green one, it's over 120 PSI. And that all has to be, you know, by ISO standards. Training, they actually had a training tower here, which probably would, right where we're at. And I don't know if you can tell, but I have a pretty good idea that this ladder that Jim's pointing out right here is a 74-foot extension ladder. And we had a 50-foot aluminum ladder that took 5 people to raise. I don't know how many people it took to raise that 74-foot extension ladder, and I'm sure it was wood, so it was even heavier. The picture on the left, they're jumping into a life safety net. The one in the middle, of course, are ladder practices, and on the right is rappelling practices. And I don't know how long they had that training tower here, but I mean, I think they're actually ahead of the game. Some of the modern training, here's a high-angle rescue with one of the big, huge dump trucks from the pit. With rope and basket training. The basket here is called a Stokes basket. And we, you know, have gotten people down off buildings and off of roofs using that. You know, talking about the high-angle rescue, you know, practice and practice and practice. Well, anyway, on September the 12th of 2013, they actually had to use their high-angle rescue practices to get Larry Morales down out of that lift there. They came down from the top. You know, I don't know if everybody's familiar with the head frame. There's like a deck up on top of the head frame. They came down from the top, put Larry in a harness, and then lowered Larry down to the ground. So in all that training, you know, they were able to use it, which turned out to be great, especially for Larry. Here's a couple of slides of different training here. The one on the left, if you can see the very first firefighter going through the door, he's got a thermal imager there. And we got two of those thermal imagers in 2001. And they were actually just a touch under $40,000. And I'm sure a lot of you people donated money and helped out, because we didn't use any tax money to buy those. It was all through donations. There was all kinds of different fundraisers that we put together to get those in. Nowadays they're a lot cheaper. I think they're around $7,000 to $8,000 a piece, and they're a lot lighter. picture on the upper right is some of the extrication practices that we've done over the years. You can see the reciprocating saw right in the front there was used to, at that time, cut the windshield after the A post and B post had been cut with the extrication jaws of life cutters. That good-looking guy in the middle is actually in the back room right now. That's Shane Worley. We had training practice down in the old, I can't remember, sports arena. And when they were getting ready to demolish that, we were able to go in and practice in there.
How is that used and what is that used for?
Oh, a very good question. Just asking how it is used and what is it used for. Great, thank you. I should have mentioned that. We use the thermal imagers to find fires that are hidden in walls, hidden in ceilings. But the most important use of that thermal imager is to find people who may be down, passed out, and your body emits heat, and the thermal imager will pick up the heat from the body. And, oh, and actually, you know, the police have used it a couple of times to, you know, if people are running away from them, might be hiding in the alley or hiding in the bushes, you know, they would come and grab it to see if they could find it. We've also used them on car accidents where, you know, in the middle of the night when it's dark and we're not too sure if every one of the occupants of a vehicle had been found, we would check the area to make sure we didn't see any outlines of any bodies. A very good question. Yeah.
The next batch of fires you're pretty familiar with everybody in the room probably. These are the memorable 70s fires and the infamous fires starting with the Lennox Hotel. And pass around this sheet, it's kind of an overlay of the business, the uptown business district, central business district. And it's got some areas that are colored in yellow, buildings that have either disappeared or burned or had some connection with some kind of a fire in the past few years. And some have been rebuilt, and some are just empty parking lots now. It's kind of interesting, but they're numbered, and the numbers are on the back of the buildings if you can't recognize which ones they are. The Lennox Hotel was the first fire. This is up on Granite Street across from, it was next to McKee Printing, which is across from the Silver Bow Center up on Granite, across from the courthouse. And you can see in the picture here, this was McKee Printing, and this was the Lennox Hotel, and this is the water tower. So that vacant lot that's on Granite Street, this is part of that area. This is the Penny's fire in February 1972. It sat on the corner there of Dakota and Park Street. Took out the buildings all the way back to the Underground Bar on this end, and came across and took out the Clark Hotel, the Bronx Bar, Baltimore Block, and Washington Block, which included the first store and the Cherry Lounge. Medical Arts Building fire in July of '73, the northeast corner of Park and Main Street. It's where the present Northwestern Energy is building their new building. Let's get some pictures of where it is. There's a cell phone.
Yes.
A cell phone. It all fits into the first Diana Hughes fire was on October 1974, which was next to the parking lot, next to the Phoenix building. This was the second Diana Hughes fire, which was across the street 4 years later. This was the Pennsylvania Block fire, which was next to the Diana Hughes building on Park Street. This was a picture of Galena Street with the Pennsylvania Block on fire. This is the Silver Bowl, Intermountain, and Louis Shawn buildings on Granite Street, across from Montana Standard. This is a parking lot. This is the picture that's on display downstairs, on the landing. Pretty interesting picture. This is a wall painting picture. other fires of note in that area, Perfection Spring and Auto, Montana Hotel. This is Perfection Spring and Auto at Main and Silver Street. It's the old Montana Hotel. They say there's a little piece of granite that was on the top there that says Montana. It's in that parking lot now. They burned this building and the house next door between the two churches on the corner. This is the Grand Hotel. This was burned a couple times, but it never burned to the ground. The other ones were pretty good. They managed to save this building. This was still there. The 40 breweries down here.
Yeah.
They call it the Ring Hotel too. This is Speedway Bar, La Casino Restaurant. Is that in front, Daryl? Is that is my 98? The Sundowner Saloon, Martin's Bar, Martin's Hotel on Utah Street. Montana Broom and Brush in April of 2003. That's been rebuilt. It's the Wayland Tire Fire on Arizona and Luna. Here. Another picture of the Wayland Tire Fire. This is Ryan Fruit Company. Well, had this building before. This building burned 3 or 4 times. But this fire really put it out of commission. This building next door has been kind of gone.
Very recently, yeah.
Wayland Tire Building. You notice Bertolio's on the corner across the street. It's kind of what it looks like now, the Bertolio building, the new Wayland Tire building, and then this lot is empty. It's kind of a comparison. This is Bertolio's. And this is the Ryan Fruit Company, which is this building here.
I just going to mention on that fire June 9th, 1927, William M. Gleason was on the fire department for 5 years. He died in that fire. This here is one, our dress uniform, our Class A uniform. The daily uniforms are all made out of Nomex, fire resistant. And if you have a t-shirt on, it has to be 100% cotton. No polyesters. I mentioned earlier the firefighting gear and how most of that's all made out of Nomex. This was a fire down on Nevada Street in 2008. I don't remember what the temperature was. It was cold as heck. But if you see all the ice on everybody's coats and bunkers, it actually, the ice will insulate you from the cold, believe it or not. This is the picture on the left where they just got brand new uniforms. They're all standing in front of the 54 La France. It might have been the same year they marched in the 4th of July parade. This is in '73. The firefighters since 1953 have been very involved in muscular dystrophy. From raising money to fill the Butte, attending summer camps, and various other functions. This is, you can tell how bad that fire station was. This was probably in '75 or '6. And if you get a chance, if you're not in too big a hurry when you leave, check out our exhibit. We have it on this floor, on the landing, and then also down on the first floor. Just some credits for all the photos, the standard, the archives, some others. Perfect timing.
I guess it's time to go.
Any questions? 102, that was pretty good.
Okay, very good.
Marissa?
How high does the ladder truck go?
The new fire truck goes 100 feet. Actually, it goes 102.
Which equates to the height of what building, like?
We can reach, with that new ladder truck, we can reach the 9th floor of the Finland Hotel.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to point out this banner here in the middle was the banner for the Working Men's Union, which was started June 13th, 1878, I think. Anyway, the fire department was in that union shortly after they were organized, And then in July 20th, 1918, we became members of the International Association of Firefighters, local number 96. And that banner is hanging in the hallway there. Oh, yes.
What's the breakdown on the amount of time the fire department spends on fires versus, let's say, car and auto accident rescue versus cats from trees and...
Well, you know, actually, the EMS calls are 74% of the calls.
Wow.
I have that here.
Shelley, do you know that on the job?
Come on, Shelley.
Perchance?
Yeah, it's close to what John said, between 75 and 80% somewhere, Jim.
Wow.
That's, wow,
Maybe
yeah,
a little
thank
higher.
God it's not all fires.
Yes.
I must have sent that around the room. They had the report from 2014, which listed all the calls. There's actually, in the NIPRS, National Fire Incident Reporting System, in Butte, we had 88 different categories that were filled in on the incident reporting system. The fires, it's floating around here somewhere. Here's one if you have a chance. This is a report from the J.C. Penney fire. And in the report here, it says they used 13 different fire hydrants.
Wow.
What they can do, the water company, they have valves that they can shut down or decrease the water pressure in certain areas and increase it in other areas. So at this fire, they increased the water pressure in the area of, you know, Park and Dakota Street. But they used 13 different fire hydrants. And there was a lot of guys there.
What was the main accelerant for the Penny's fire? What, do you know what really got things to
Money.
that?
I don't think they ever came out with the cause. There was lots of rumors.
Yeah.
That it blew up. You know, but I don't think there was ever an official. Probably so darn much damage they really didn't know what happened.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Oh, I thought you had a question. Yes, go ahead.
And the original fire department that is part of City Hall, what we know as City Hall, down on Broadway, where was the horses kept? In the original, our old City Hall, where the fire department.
There was a livery stable, all of the livery stables on where the medical arts building was, and they had some stable area behind their buildings there by the alley there, behind the City Hall and Park Street.
Okay.
I'm guessing that's probably where they would have. That was a livery stable.
Thank you.
And here at this station, they kept them downstairs, you know, on the bay apparatus floor. They were at the north end of the building. Diana?
John, is there some sort of grid of the fire hydrants so that when you go to a fire, you know which fire hydrant is the closest? Or how do you know?
Well, it should be, but we don't. You pretty much know that almost on every, in the old city limits, City of Butte, there was always a hydrant on every corner. And sometimes there was hydrants in the middle of the block. But you pretty much know that, you know, where the fire hydrants are. When we get out into the old county area, we do have maps uptown, at the uptown fire station. You can radio in, ask them where the nearest fire hydrant is, and hit that on your way in. And like I said, they're all colored with the different amounts of pressure. Yes, sir.
What percentage of the fires that occurred are suspected of being set fires?
Well, I can't answer that, but I'll bet you in the 1970s a great deal of them were
Including the Columbia Gardens.
suspected. Especially, I don't know if it's true or not, but of course the Anaconda Company got blamed for a lot of them. Whether they did it or not, there's no proof.
It seemed like every time the auditors came from out of state, there seemed to be a fire.
The auditors for the Anaconda Company?
Yeah.
Well, she said that every time there was a fire in Butte, when the auditors for the Anaconda Company came, there was a fire in Butte.
It seemed to be.
I wish I could find that, the report list of all the different fires that,
Probably over that side
yeah,
somewhere.
I just,
Is it with the yellow?
oh, it's just regular, it's 2 sheets of paper.
Oh.
If that's floating around, you'll be able to tell what the exact number of calls in different categories, like, say for instance, natural gas leaks, you know, but the biggest by far is the EMS calls. Any more questions?
All right, thank you, John.